I am so excited to welcome the filmmakers of both of the films that we've just seen. Hannah Polinski, Terry Dorman, Ben Silberfarb, and Abby, what's your last name? Gardner. What a treat. So we're gonna, I don't want to talk here at all. I want you guys to get a chance to answer your questions, but I thought I would just kick it off by asking Hannah and then the team over here to talk about the seeds of the project, or the science of the project, as the case may be, and in particular, in the case of the team over there, how you guys navigated the creative partnership for storytelling, which was extraordinary. So, Hannah, would you start us off?
So, hi everyone. Thank you for having my film. It was great to be screened here. So Perennials is my first film. So it was I produced it as part of a project with Hampshire Film Festival. They run a program called Unsung Voices, which is kind of like a summer filmmaking camp. So I got accepted into that program last year, so I made this last summer. That was my summer project. And it was a story I'd been thinking about for a long time. It's kind of based on my relationship with my father. We don't really speak a lot. And I was living in France for a few years, so I hadn't really seen him for over a year or two. And then I came back to our house, and I found that he had grown a bunch of pineapples in our living room. And I'm from Ontario, so that's kind of strange to have a bunch of pineapples in your living room. So that's kind of where the idea of the project came from, just the idea of like a father and a daughter, and they have like this kind of, there's just something between them that they can't bridge, but then they just have this thing that grows between them. And that becomes a motif to kind of reflect upon the relationship and just see what becomes of that. And that's how Perennials was born.
I guess our film started when Terry called me up through a mutual friend to document a few of the things he was doing on his orchard. And it started off just, could you just video some of these techniques that I'm using to graft and to prune, and I knew immediately that there was a lot more to the story here, and I was lucky enough that Terry was also interested in broadening out the story and so on, and we spent a year and a half filming. So I guess that's the roots of the project. And my background is in environmental work, primarily working for the Nature Conservancy. Went back to graduate school for conservation-oriented stuff as well, and was also interested in filmmaking and wanted to marry the two, and this was really an opportunity to do that from my perspective. So that's the origins of the project.
Would Addie or Terry like to add on to that?
Sure. When I started in 1995, if you were standing at tree 1, you couldn't see tree 2. It was all forest. There were parts where they were open, but it was hard to know it was an orchard unless you were in the middle of it. 15 years later, I regretted that I didn't take a picture. And so, as I thought about what we were doing, I wanted to get something on film. And the initial idea was, let's just video what we're doing for a year, and people will understand what's involved in saving this place. And Ben and I started working together. And as I saw the first footage from early winter, I realized we had something. And then I also knew that we needed other voices. So I asked Addie to participate, Jeff Clifford to participate, and Bob Gray, who's a good friend and buys a lot of apples for his cider making, was an indispensable part of this. And so that's how it happened. We showed this in Hanover a little over a month ago. The Q&A was great. I was asked about how apples are named, and Addie was just about to talk about a new variety and how it was named. Not a new variety, but new to our orchard. So I will let her do that.
So the variety is one we stumbled across from Fedco called Rusty Neckers. And it's kind of a strange name. But the story behind it goes, someone was collecting apples for years and years from this tree, unnamed tree, a wild tree that was delicious. And there was all this myrtle growing at the base of the tree that they ripped up because it was hard for them to find the good drops that had fallen. And in that process, they found 2 little gravestones for some kitty cats, one named Rusty and one named Neckers. And that's the story of the name of that tree.
I love that. I want to walk the microphone around to questions so that we can hear it. I'll run right over here.
Thanks so much. I've known Ben since we were really, really little in Norwich, and it's just amazing to see what he's doing, and lovely to be introduced to you. This might be a little gauche, but can you say something about, I don't know, the economics of how all this happens on an orchard? Because it's just mind-boggling. However you want to answer that.
The film or the orchard?
Well, first the orchard, at least.
I started the orchard, as you know, from the beginning of the film. I would look at it and see it was disappearing into the forest. And I was still thinking about the loss of our family property dating back to prior to the Revolutionary War. And nobody even remembered it. And I realized that here was this piece of conserved land, but nobody thought about, the land was conserved forever. It was part of the Quechee Lakes Landowners Association Greenbelt. But one component, the orchard, was being lost. And I decided I'll do it. And for me, it was a great tonic because I had people screaming at me all week, and I could work in the evenings and weekends on the orchard. And with the help of a number of the trustees, including some who are here today, we were able to open the orchard, and it's become a pick-your-own destination, and so a lot of people are able to enjoy it. I came to Vermont wanting to preserve a farm so that in the end, when I couldn't be there anymore, it could carry on. And so we did it here. We didn't expect to do it here. The economics of farming, any type of farming, are tough. And in this case, I'm doing a lot of the work myself, which makes it more economically viable. And I've got the best deal.
Other questions?
I also want to mention Daniel Bellasetti, who's back here, who did the sound mix and sound.
This is for Terry. Thank you for sharing your story. But I have a question in terms of how is climate change affecting your orchard?
We have a number of varieties that I wouldn't have thought planting years ago. So we're sort of halfway between zone 4 and zone 5, and we're now bringing zone 5 apples in. We have a variety, a newer variety, bred at Purdue, Gold Rush, which really we have too short a growing season, but because of what's happening, we decided to plant a few, and they will freeze every 3rd year on the tree, but you can see that we're getting more harvest than not, and the same for a number of other varieties. So we're planting longer season apples.
We also watered trees last year because it was so dry. So any young trees that have been planted, or any trees that were planted in ledgy areas. So that was kind of shocking to see young to mid-age, like a 7-year-old tree just starting to wilt. It's a little scary.
Thank you all for your time and energy. This is a question for Ben specifically. I both noticed and appreciated how I felt like your film did away with a lot of the more traditional documentary conventions of like, you know, having someone with their name written in front of them talking at you at a table or something, or timestamps. Was that an intentional choice? Did it just sort of happen? Can you speak a little bit more about that and how you chose to structure the film that way?
Yeah, thank you for noticing. I wanted an organic film. I wanted a film that reflected in as many aspects as possible what I felt Terry and Addie were doing and the philosophy of their property, of that farm. And so it came out organically as part of the storytelling. This is something that harks back a little bit and informed the process of developing this film is in regards to environmental issues that are happening. And quite often I feel like people are scolded and about the current environmental situation, and certainly there's blame to be put around on everybody, but that's not really what I think is an effective way to make people appreciate the place they are or the environment. And specifically in this region, I feel like there are so many gems of locations and special places. And I really wanted that to be reflected in how the story was told.
Did you have a question? You had mentioned adding varieties to your stock. Are you also losing varieties because of climate changing? Is it?
The trees are stressed in a year like last year. It was a light crop year because the prior crop was heavy. It was a drought. A lot of insect hatches lately. So we've had some varieties, maybe a weaker growing variety that are challenged. We haven't lost any varieties to climate. I mean, we have lost to some animal damage because with now over 140 varieties and 600 trees, you can do the math. Sometimes we only have one tree of a particular variety. So we have not had any climate change losses, but we've seen what the change in climate is doing.
We've had a couple over on this side.
I thought it was interesting how both films have an underlying story of land and loss and maybe grief and hope, and just wondering how that came to be in both films. Like, was it there in the beginning, or did it evolve as you worked on it?
I think for mine, the idea of rebirth was always kind of there. Based on what I said earlier, like, yeah, it's based on how my dad started growing pineapples. But originally the film was not supposed to be set in a forest. Originally I wanted it to be similar to how I experienced it. So I wanted it to be the character coming to in this house, and this house was just like full of pineapples everywhere. I wanted it to be like there's pineapples like on the shelves, there's pineapples like in the kitchen, like there's pineapples like in the fridge, like it was like a house full of pineapples. But that's very hard to do practically. And I found the location, the location I found, it was originally a friend's house, and then I went to see the friend's house, and then in her backyard was just like this beautiful forest with like this very large lake in the background, which you can see in the credit scene, and it was just too beautiful to not use. So I changed the film to be just entirely in the outdoors. And I think when you change it to be in the outdoors, then you do start drawing. It's a lot of like more of the metaphors of like plants and life and rebirth and just different cycles. So originally, yeah, I guess originally it wasn't my plan, but it kind of ended up working out nicely in that way.
If you're involved in farming or gardening, there's new life and death every day. I mean, you're composting old plants and you're using them to grow the new ones. And so that was sort of not lost on me. But Ben really deserves the credit for turning my unformed idea of chronicling the orchard to a piece that really told a story at a level that resonates. So I've thanked Ben a number of times. I need to thank him again. But we spent 2 years together, and it began at the tail end of the first year of COVID when I called, and I think it was either on December 31st or December 30th, and I said I would like to start filming. And he said, when? And I said, tomorrow morning. And he arrived. And then we've had countless dinners and sessions reviewing everything. I've had the good fortune of getting to know Ben's wife, Diane, and then towards the end of the project, Cal Felicetti, who is an arborist that worked with me in the orchard in the early days, asked if I would spend some time with his son pruning, and Daniel and I were in the orchard, and I asked him, what do you tell me about yourself? And early in the conversation, he said, well, I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design. And I said, where'd you study? Sound and filmmaking. So it's pretty neat to have that introduction, and a number of months later have Daniel working with us, putting this final sound edit that you heard today. Thank you again, Dan.
Yeah, I feel lucky to have been given the time to spend in an orchard, and I think filmmaking is all about time and spending enough time to fully explore what we've taken on. It's lucky to be given that.
I think this is a question mostly for Ben. You know, those of us who watch films, for the most part, don't really know what goes into the art and the craft of what you do. You know, somehow you create a world for us. And there are a couple of things that I noticed that I'd love if you would talk a little bit more about. One of them is focus. You use focus really interestingly, and also panning shots. And I'm sure I missed 1,000 other little things, but if you could talk a little bit more about craft and how you help us believe in this, I would appreciate it.
I love cameras. I love the technical aspect of how cameras work and function, and it's just a joy to work with them. But a part of the craft, there are many layers to it: sound, and image, and writing, and so on. But you know, you spend a lot of time gathering images, and sometimes you go into Terry and I will have talked about a subject that we want to cover in the film, and we spend some time talking about it, and then we go into the field and work on how to express that and so on. So, you know, all of that kind of organically comes together in an edit process. But the camera, I think, is very important in both focusing people's thoughts, subconsciously and consciously, about what you're talking about, and narrowing that or broadening that. And it's a very subtle thing that happens, you know, when you look at the films that you see at festivals like this, these filmmakers are thinking about all of those things, so it's one of those things that you really pay attention to. And everything that they do is done on purpose. Every edit is done on purpose. Every shot is done on purpose. And it takes a lot of time. And I guess that's a roundabout way to answer that process. But it's also a intensely collaborative process. Work with Addie, work with Terry, work with Daniel, work with all different people, and it's a collaborative vision that comes together. So, part two.
I saw a hand up there, and we'll try to get both of these last two questions in. We have the next film coming in a minute.
Thank you. On Whitman Brook, it was obvious that the theme of time was present. That was one of the characters, was time. And now I hear Ben talk about time in a functional way, but also I'm just curious about the interplay, how almost like there's a sense of a circular perspective of time that comes from nature, but also from the interaction between the two. If there's more to say about that, I would like to hear.
I mean, yes, that it's somewhat simple in that the story is really a story about Terry and the cycles of time in the orchard and reflecting on our time and the cycles of change that go through every one of us, and marrying that to the cycles of the seasons in the orchard. Starting off talking about Terry as a young kid in high school and going all the way through with his mentor, Bob Gray, and the process of trees and the rhythms of nature in an orchard. It was very simple in a way and very deliberate to echo those two factors of time.
Speaking of rhythm, there's an unknown beating of a drum somewhere. We're trying to figure out where that's coming from. But and our last question.
This is for Hannah. When you first spoke, when you came up there, you said that originally your project was going to be about pineapples all over the house. And to my knowledge, pineapples are not a perennial, are they?
They actually are.
Well, I'm mistaken. And so was that how you came to the name, or did it have to do with the trees or the generations of family?
Yeah, it was a bit of both. The title was something very last minute, and I'm very happy I came to perennials, because originally it was going to be called The Pineapple Farmer, but it didn't really have a ring. And one of my cast members kept accidentally calling it The Potato Farmer, which was kind of crazy because there's no potatoes involved. But yeah, I was looking up just kind of like plant names, and I came across perennials, and I found out that pineapples are perennial plants. And I thought that kind of worked nice in terms of the themes of the film that I'm exploring, in terms of how the father and the daughter, they come to kind of like a second sort of understanding of each other. And in the end, when they kind of plant the new baby pineapple together, that's like a second chance at rebirth. It's a chance that maybe the relationship will come and take a new form rather than what they've had before. So I think, yeah, the perennial kind of works in the sense of like relationships are always changing. They don't have to be static the whole life, which is kind of the idea I wanted to explore. Because a lot of like family relationships, you kind of like in your mind can just be like, oh, like I don't like my mom, I don't like my dad for these reasons. But I kind of wanted to explore the idea that that doesn't have to always be like that. You can always change, and you can always come to a new form of understanding, a new form of life. So that's what I was trying to get at with the title.
Thank you.
And my husband just sneaked in. He just said, Ben has to just say something about drones. But before you just say something about filming with drones, I just want to say that the serendipity of these two films coming together, you can imagine our glee programming this festival to find a short film that echoed so many of the beautiful themes of nature and circularity. Can you just say a quick word about how you got those beautiful aerial shots, please?
I only crashed my drone once and it completely destroyed it, but 2 weeks later it fell out of the tree, and I got a couple of those images from that. I since then bought a new drone, but no, the drones they're a blast. I think they're overused somewhat nowadays, but so it was tempting for me to put in a lot more drone footage, but I hope what was in there was effective.
Great. Well, please join me in thanking filmmakers. And our next film will start at 2 o'clock or a couple minutes after. If you can stick around, have a break. There's some snacks, bathrooms. Ben and these guys might be out in the lobby to chat some more. Thanks for coming.